Okay. If you want to go back to host, because I'm a little bit worried I'm gonna not see someone that's trying to get in. Do you know how to do that? I don't know if I know how to do that, but do I have to?
I'm worried it'll kick you out of your presentation, but let me try, because to be very
Oh, that's
honest,
okay.
it should have allowed me to be co-host and let people in.
Oh, maybe it will.
We'll see. Go ahead and start. I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay. All right. So we are here talking about special education, 504 plans, and just basically how to help struggling students. So my name is Melissa Timon, and I am a parent consultant with the Utah Parent Center, serving youth in care and state care. And so that's what my role is. Um, and I was super happy that Teresa contacted me and asked me to present. And the Utah Parent Center has, we serve statewide, but we have some consultants that are contracted with certain districts. So, like Alpine actually has a consultant that's contracted with them, and Nebo does. And then if a district doesn't have someone, then we have statewide consultants that can um, work with you. But saying that, we don't get sales commission or something from like working. So if you would like to contact your district rep, or you can contact me and we can work together with the district, either way works. We just want to make sure that you get all of your needs met. And all of us at the Utah Parent Center are parents with kids with disabilities. So we kind of all understand some challenges that families are facing. I have 4 kids, one that had an IEP and 2 others that should have had 504s, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So that's what I'm here hoping to help you with, some things that you may not know. So federal education law requires that every state needs to have a parent training center. So the Utah Parent Center is designated that for Utah. And so we've actually been around for 40 years. And I think it's like our 41st year or something. So yeah. So if I could have you guys fill out, this is kind of the lame part, fill out this survey. I'm gonna, now I can't see you guys, so I'm having it, I don't know how to put it in the chat here. Um, let's see. We're just funded by different things and grants and stuff, and so they want to make sure that we're serving all the populations in the state. And so they just we just have to get this information. We don't ever share any specific information from people. We just keep that for ourselves. So like, if we talk to you again, we kind of have a background, but just the demographic information. Are you guys able to? Okay, okay, here I can, okay, let me put it in the chat here. Okay. So I'll just wait a minute while you guys fill that out. I just realized I wasn't changing the screen on what I was sharing. So, Okay. So my next, I was going to come in person and I was going to bring chocolate. But since I'm not here in person, now you just get to look at chocolate. So take yourself off mute or put it in the chat. And have you heard of the Utah Parent Center? Just yes or no.
No.
So Terry says yes. And then if you've heard of us, have you taken advantage of any of our services before? Um, and if you have, tell me about what, what? And since it's a chocolate question and we're just going to talk about chocolate a little bit, what's your favorite way to eat chocolate? You can put that in the chat. Like in a truffle over ice cream. I like that. Um, Teresa hasn't heard of us before. And how do you like your chocolate? Truffle with nuts. I like that in a candy bar. Yep. All right. Okay. So, well, that's perfect then. This is going to be great. I'm going to hopefully tell you a lot about what we do. So we are, like I said, we provide services statewide to parents of children and youth with all disabilities. So we don't have like a criteria that you have to call us. If you have like problems with school and you think your child might have ADHD, give us a call. We don't really have any criteria to give us a call. Um, and we also work with professionals. So we get a lot of calls working with youth in care. I get a lot of professional, like caseworkers giving me a call and things like that. So, and we mostly do like one-on-one consultations. So that's kind of our um, main thing that we do. So like someone will give us a call or send an email and we can talk about what questions they have. Like say, we have a student, my student's IEP is not being followed by the school. Like, what do I do? Or I think my son might need special education. How do I do? Yes, help us find a good provider for an evaluation. So like with, we have a list that actually the state keeps a list of ABA providers and autism evaluation providers, which I can send that list over. And that is super helpful because there's so many and they change and stuff. And so whenever someone gives us a call and says like, can you put me in your referral list? I'm like, are you on the state's list? That's who we send out, because we don't really have, we can't really give like referrals as in like, oh, we like this one or this one, but we can do a general list. And that those lists also that the state provides has like their insurance that they take. And a lot of times it will say like how their wait time. And I think they update it every month. So that's great information. And so, yeah, so one-on-one consultations. We also do trainings during the school year. I feel like there's a few a week, but at least once a month, we do trainings, anything from like IEP 101 to anxiety to behavior. I'm doing a presentation in September on like acronyms for special education or for disability world special education. So there's just a ton of different things. And I'm an education consultant, and so I help a lot with education. And so, and there's a whole group of us that work with education, but then there's a whole group that work with like medical needs and helping with guardianship and Social Security and Medicaid and DSPD. And then there's a group that is like called our transition team. And so they help with like guardianship questions or transferring out of school services into adult services and things like that. So we have a lot of employees. We actually have 45 employees. And so that's and a requirement to work at the Utah Parent Center is you need to have a child with a disability. So as you can tell, that would be a lot of different disabilities, a lot of life experiences that we've all had, and a lot of life lessons that we've learned, good or bad. I often share like, this is what I did bad. I wouldn't recommend that. Or this is what worked for my son. So, we kind of have that unique perspective. And then we can provide like trainings for professionals, but then we can also attend IEP meetings. If things are not going well, um, usually we try not to attend right off the bat. We want to provide you with some information. But if things are not going well, communication's broken down, or there's some dispute problems, then we can certainly attend IEP meetings. And all of our services are free. So, um, just a quick slide, like, oh, sorry, when to call the Utah Parent Center. Um, oh, sorry, I'm like, okay. Um, so you can call us for a number of reasons. Really, we get questions all the time that we're like, huh, we haven't heard that before. Like, what, what is that? And we work together all the time. And like I said, we don't get like sales, commission or anything. So we're always working together, trying to help our parents. So, if you have special education, you have questions, or your pediatrician recommended, you give us a call. You're thinking your child's not hitting milestones, um, or you're looking for evaluations or diagnosis, anything like that. Really anything we want to try to help you with. Okay. So how do schools support struggling students? So there's a few different ways. So first would be multi-tiered system of support. And this is something that all schools are required to do. And we'll talk about each of these. Another way would be a 504 plan. Have you guys heard of 504 plans? Um, I'd never heard of that before. And then a special education plan, which uh, is an individual education plan. And sometimes I was confused on what was special education, what was IEP, what was resource, and they really are all the same, but it's just different things about that, and we'll talk about those. So let's first talk about the multi-tiered system of support. So what this is all schools are required to do it. Sometimes it's called MTSS, or sometimes it's called response to intervention. So if you've ever heard a school say RTI, that might be it also. And what this is, it can be used for like behavior or academics, and it's really structured to be inclusive for all students. So tier one is kind of universal interventions or universal supports for all students. And so these are just school-wide interventions that the whole school is doing, each class is doing. And when tier one practices are working smoothly, it doesn't feel like interventions. It's more like this is how we do things in the class. Like the expectations are clear and repeated, the routines are taught and practiced, and visual reminders are up so students can see them. So a strong tier one is really the best and most efficient way for schools to use their time and resources. And if tier one isn't working well, then the school's not implementing it well or something, then more kids are going to be moved up to these other tiers. And so let me just share a story. So we had a preschool teacher living next door, and her name was Jandora. If anyone knows Jandora, it's a unique name. So if you know a Jandora, it's probably her. But I'll just brag on her for a minute. She always said, I've never had any behavior problems or students problems, which I was like, really? I hardly believe that. But when I went to her, we did a little preschool orientation, and obviously kids in preschool are going to need the most support, right? But it was amazing. She had them sit down at the chair. She taught them how to pull the chair out, where to hold on the top of the chair and pull the chair out. She taught them how to twist the glue lid. She taught them how to twist the glue lid to be shut. She taught them which direction the pencils should go in the thing. She taught them when they get out of their chair how to push in their seat. She got down on the floor, showed them where to put their hands on the chair, and showed them how to push in the chair. I mean, it was like there was no room for error because these kids knew exactly what they were supposed to do. And so she was doing great tier one so that she hardly needed any tier two or tier three interventions really at school because she provided so much support for them. So tier two are, like 5 to 10% of the kids. And this is um, it's called targeted support. So they're just kids who are needing a little more adult supervision maybe required, or maybe more instruction provided. And really they're working on like more relationships with educators. Academically, this could mean like a small reading group. And then kids that are not succeeding in tier one and tier two, and just as saying, tier one should be implemented always, even with tier two and tier three. Those broad supports are beneficial to all. And so tier three is going to be more individualized support. So this is for a student who has intense or repeated behavior, or is really not, or they're really struggling academically. And so that may be tier three. And so some components of that might be um, support that goes beyond what maybe just a general education teacher alone can provide. So we're needing some extra school support. Um, maybe this is a good time, we're 1 to 5% of the kids. Is this kid needs special education evaluation? So this is something to look at there. And we're not going to talk really much about behavior today, but functional behavior assessment or a behavior intervention plan, is that something that might be needed? And then also includes support. It could include support from other agencies. Okay, so that's MTSS. Now I'm just going to quick, this doesn't really belong anywhere, so I just put it here. So charter schools, I don't know if you have kids that go to charter schools, but they are public schools, and you probably know that, but they are required to follow all the regulations that at 504 and IDEA that all the public schools are also required to follow. So just to be aware of that. I remember when charter schools came out, it was kind of confusing what they were, if they were a private school or what, but they are a public school. The only thing they are not required to provide, like with special education, transportation can be provided, and charter schools are not required to provide transportation. I don't know how they got out of that, but they don't have to do that. Okay, so let's talk about, before we talk about 504 and IEPs, let's talk about accommodations and modifications. So accommodations are how a student learns the material. So do they learn better sitting at the front of the class? Do they learn better when instructions are written out for them and verbally told them? Do they learn better if they have something they can fidget with? Do they learn better if um, maybe they can't get the information out, and so maybe text to speech? So they're learning all the same information, but they just need some accommodations to present what they know. But a modification is actually what a student knows. So a student, what a student is being taught or expected to learn. So does the student need maybe a lower level of math than his peers, need modified instruction in that math, or modified instruction in behaviors because they're just not picking up on any of those tiers? So this is different. And so just to be clear, a 504 only has accommodations. And we'll talk about a 504 in the next slides. But an IEP has modifications and accommodations. So that's kind of the general big difference right there. Then just quick, state testing. So, we're required to have state testing. All states are required to do state testing to get federal funding. And kids with modifications are actually, it's not allowed to have modifications on the state testing, which you might be like, really? These kids need more help, but that's not allowed. But they really want to compare them to their peers. And it's okay if they don't do as well. We just want to compare. The state wants to see what they know. But accommodations are provided because this is showing how they know. It's just it's how they are showing how they know it, you know? And so not all accommodations, if you have a reading section of the test, you can't have a reader read that section. But in general, most accommodations can be provided on state tests. And you know, this is not going towards a student's grade, and so it's okay. You know, it's just what it is. You just tell your student to do the best they can. Don't stress about it, but just do the best they can. Okay, so next is 504s. So 504, you know, sometimes a kid is not progressing with MTSS, you know, that multi-tiered supports. And one thing that can be provided is a Section 504. And this, a Section 504 really emphasizes equal access and opportunity. And so this next slide, you might have seen this picture of these kids on the blocks before. I feel like someone needs to make a new picture. I feel like it's been around for a long time, but that's the only one I know of. So Section 504 is actually civil rights law, and it prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. And so anything that receives federal funding, like schools, government buildings, things like that, those are, they all have to provide accommodations for people with disabilities. And so it's really trying to, you know, prohibit discrimination. And it provides students with a disability equal access to education. So look at the picture. So in this first picture, you have 3 blocks. They're all equal. You have all equal blocks. You have an equal set fence, but obviously everybody's not enjoying this baseball game like everybody else, and they're not able to access or watch this baseball game. So this is kind of like a classroom. You go into classroom, everyone has the same teacher, everyone has the same view of the board, everyone has the same size desk, but sometimes that's not really appropriate for everyone, right? And so this next picture in the middle shows a picture of um, the blocks being moved to help the smaller kids. And so that might be providing written out for certain kids or something like that. But I love this last picture because this last picture is actually just eliminating that fence. And now they all can see through that fence just the same. I think of this as like subtitles on a movie, right? Like everyone's watching that same movie and everyone is getting all the information just the same. And we're not having to create special things for special kids. Sometimes that needs to happen, but in a lot of instances, we can just remove that barrier. And that's what sometimes tier 1 can do. Okay, so you know, when should a student be evaluated for Section 504? So we talked about that MTSS. So maybe that student is still struggling even with classroom supports in place. And so let's maybe evaluate them for special or for a 504. But also, you have students that may have been identified as having a disability by a doctor or other professional. Like, let's say a child has asthma. You don't need, there's no like tiers of support. You know, we don't need to put them out in smoky air to see if they really have asthma. You know, like we can take that information. It's not, a 504 is required to have multiple forms of evaluate, yeah, multiple forms of what's it called? Information. So a doctor, a parent, maybe what the student, you know, the school has seen or something. But we don't have to have like a formal evaluation. You know, we don't have to test and see if a kid has a peanut allergy. You know, we can just go with that, which is common sense. And then if the school suspects that the student may have a disability, um, and hasn't been identified, or maybe they've been referred by a parent or the school for special education. So they can evaluate for special education. And if that student maybe doesn't qualify for special education, maybe a 504 would be the most appropriate. Okay. So Section 504, the eligibility is an individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that is like pretty broad, if you agree. And it's made that way so that they want to just ensure that anyone with a disability does not get discriminated against. And that's in school and workplace in the community. And so they need only one impairment that substantially limits one major life activity. So that impairment can be episodic or in remission. So let's say you go to school in the fall and your student has allergies in the spring, but they're not having it right now. And so, but you can still receive a 504 even if they're in remission or it's episodic. Um, that might be the case with like depression meds too. If they're taking something that mitigates the disability or makes it so it's not happening right there now, that doesn't disqualify them. So if they're taking medication for ADHD or they have maybe assistive technology, that doesn't disqualify a student. So I think that's good information to know. So we talked about major life activities. So here's a list of major life activities that could substantially limit. So caring for oneself. I'm not going to read them all, but hearing, eating, working, communicating, all those can you know impact one's life. And then it said physical or mental impairment. So this is just some of these. There's lots of physical impairments that can happen. And so anything that disrupts their education by a physical impairment can be used. Now, just to say, I actually had a friend whose son had a very substantial bladder problem where he had to put a catheter in every time he went to the bathroom. And he was very bright, but they were able to teach him how to do it on his own, and he really never needed any school support. So does he need a 504? No, not necessarily. He was doing okay. If he needed more support from the school, then yes. And they could have had a 504 and never really needed to use it. But so either, you can see how you may need it or you might not. And some things that are not included, which are kind of interesting, are eyeglasses. So if a student can't see, eyeglasses are not included. And I don't know if that's just because it's so popular, they can't hold schools responsible for providing eyeglasses. But that's not included. And then also like if a student breaks their arm or something, they don't, you don't, can't receive a 504 for some things like that. Now, obviously a school can work with a student, but that's usually not covered. Um, and then, so physical or mental health impairments. So mental health impairments could include intellectual disabilities, mental health illness, and specific learning disabilities. Now, all of those and all those before could also fit into special education. So I just want you to say, so because I had someone reach out to me and say, oh, they have ADHD. I guess they won't qualify for special education. Well, they may or may not. But don't discount one or the other because of a certain condition. Okay, so the Section 504 process. So you have problems at school or at home, and you reach out to the school. You could have a parent-teacher meeting if you want, but you could also just send a referral. It's great to have a meeting just to kind of talk about what can be done, but send in a referral. And it's not required, but we always say best practice is to put it in writing because we know that teachers are underpaid and overworked and things get just dropped through the cracks. And so put your referral in writing, write it to the principal and to the teacher so that it's on two people's desk and they know that that's happened. And then observations and evaluations need to take place. Those can be from like doctor's notes and parents and teachers, like if a kid's been working through those MTSS supports, then we can take those observations too. So we don't always have to do formal observations, but some kind of observation has to have happened. And then a team meeting is held with any involved people with the involved with the student, and then accommodations and services are given. So this next slide is kind of funny because it's writing the plan. And actually with a 504, it's a little bit loosey-goosey. It is not actually required to be written, which I don't know why that wouldn't be required, but it's not even required to be written. But I've never heard of a school that doesn't write it because that's just best practice. How can everybody keep this stuff in their head? So, and as a parent, you can definitely request that written plan. Just so you know what the accommodations are. And then it should be specific enough for everyone to understand what's being provided across all settings. And because in a secondary setting, you're going to have lots of teachers trying to do these accommodations. And so it should be written plainly enough, and it should be address all the needs. So putting the plan in action, that is a little bit trickier. And if you've had a 504, then this is where it gets tricky. So everyone who works with the student should have knowledge of that plan. And so there's every school, I think, has a 504 coordinator, at least every district. And so they are giving that information to those teachers. Now, in an elementary setting, this is pretty easy and you can work with the teacher, the teacher is aware of it. But in a secondary setting, let me tell you, this doesn't go well in most situations. And because how many kids, I mean, between A and B days, a teacher might have 300 kids, right? And so it's in their system that that student has a 504, but they might have looked at it, but they don't know who the kid is, and then they forget, and lots of things are just, so it's really important as a parent to be that advocate. I mean, the school is the one responsible, but it falls through the cracks. I'll just say that. It really does, and especially in secondary schools. And so it's really important that a great idea is to put together a little snapshot of your student, put a picture of your student and what their accommodations are that are legally written on their 504 that the teacher needs to follow. And I would send that maybe before school starts, and then I would send another one after school starts because once again, they're overwhelmed just like everybody else. And so, and then maybe even reaching out and say, is there anything I can help you with? Because it should be written clearly to know how to accommodate the student, but it might not be as clear to some people. So the school is required to faithfully provide these accommodations. And so sometimes you just need to give them a little help. Okay, so this is, if you guys have a phone, or here's actually, I'll put it in the link. Here is a list of accommodations that we put together. It has that little picture of the kids with watching the baseball game on the front. And it's organized into different types: environmental, organizational, behavioral, all those different types of accommodations. And this is really just a springboard to jump off to brainstorm. What are some accommodations and how would that work for your child? You don't want to come to the school with like 20 accommodations. They're going to shut down. And so looking at what would be the most important, and in secondary schools, if every student had 20 accommodations, that's just overwhelming. They're not able to follow that. And so really you want to just look at what's most important, what would be the key things, and obviously this isn't inclusive, but a team, you have this team, and hopefully it should be a brainstorming. Like, here's some things that have worked at home. How can we make this work in the school setting? And really anything can be possible if the team is willing to do it. They should be reasonable accommodations, but it really should be a brainstorming session. Okay. All right. We have another chocolate question. Um, have you guys seen any accommodations that have really worked before? I would love to hear some. And have you seen any accommodations that have not worked? And what's a dessert that your family loves to have for the 4th of July, or you've had one time for the 4th of July? Put that in there. You can go off mute. I don't care. So I'll say one accommodation that did not work well. So this was before I started working here, and I always say like s'mores, I like it. So when my son was in school, I didn't not work here, and so I was not as informed as I am now. And so I said, "Oh yeah, he really struggles in reading. He could really use to have someone have his test read to him." Well, he didn't know that. I never told him that. And then I remember when I did tell him that, he was like, "No way, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to." And he didn't know how to walk out of class. He didn't know how to make that happen. So it was not a good accommodation for him. It could have been useful, but we didn't go over how that looks in every class and how that would look. So it was a good accommodation, but didn't work for him. And that was really a lot my fault, but and the school's fault for not walking us through how this would look to help this. So make sure your kids are involved and that they know their accommodations because the school doesn't actually force them to take advantage of these. They're just provide them for them. So make sure your kid knows what it is and that they are okay to take advantage of it. I don't know if you guys have had any experiences with that before. Um,
For
but
us, we had,
go ahead.
sorry, um, we had a 504 plan, for fifth and sixth grade in an elementary setting, and the teacher didn't even know about it. The first year I made sure the teacher knew. The second year, we had a leadership change and the principal was awful, and she refused to, like follow it. And so it was just really hard, trying to get the school to do the accommodations. Like part of our accommodations were not holding back on recess. And my child didn't tell me that they kept holding her in, and it was very frustrating. So moving forward, the following year we, made sure all the teachers knew what was expected if there was a problem. They had my cell phone number, which they should have already had, but the following year, just making sure the communication was there, things went much better.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And that is really what it takes because it's and this happened in elementary school when they weren't following.
Yeah.
So and if schools are really refusing to follow them, there are some dispute things you can do. There's an Office of Civil Rights that you can contact. First would be to go through the district to make, let them know what's happening and how can we work together to make these things happen. But there are things that you can work up to. So yeah, thank you, Julie, for sharing that. My son really enjoyed sitting at the front of the class. Like that was a great accommodation for him. He definitely had ADHD, and that was super helpful. But think about a kid that may have ADHD, but they also have a lot of trauma. And sitting with a whole class in back of them might not be helpful for them. It might increase their ADHD, their inattentiveness. And so just thinking about like what would really work with this child. And um you can always change the things. So let's say something you're trying something and it's not working. You can always go back with that team and say, "Hey, can we change this and let's give this a try." So you meet once a year, but that doesn't mean that it's just in stone for a year. You can always change things. Um, okay, so true or false question. If your child's grades are good, there is no need to consider a 504 plan. What do you think? You can say it out loud or put it in there. Boo. I like that false. Yeah, definitely false. So academic performance is only one one area of a student's education. So they can be provided um, support in behavior and social um, domains. So good, you guys got that. Okay. Um, all right. So next is special education. All right, so let's talk about special education, which is the last thing that we had taught that we had listed. So special education is under the individual. Oh, I think someone needs to put themselves on mute or so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So in 1970, US schools educated only 1 in 5 children with disabilities, and many states even had laws that excluded certain kids, including children who are deaf, blind, emotionally and behavioral challenged, and had an intellectual disability. And so luckily there were some awesome advocate parents that said, and probably teachers too, that said this is not right. Our kids need to be educated with these other kids. And so um, uh, response to that, Congress passed a federal education law, and that's called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires special education for students. So special education is specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And that could include in the classroom, home, an institution, in a resource class, maybe being pulled out for a class. But it can also be in the general education classroom with modified instruction. And it can also include instruction in physical education. So you might have a student that academically they're doing fine and behavioral they're doing fine, but they need support in physical education. And so that's
In a minute.
uh, that can also qualify for special education. Okay, so what is an IEP? So an IEP, when a child receives special education, they get an individualized education program. And so that's Crystal, can you put on mute? Is that all right? Sorry, I've done it so many times. It's no big deal. But okay, so it's an individualized education program for that student. And it's a document. That plan is a program or plan. I can't remember. I always forget, but let's say it's a plan. So it's a document that's actually spells out what that student needs, and it goes over their goals and it goes over the accommodations for your students. So remember I said that they can have modified instruction and accommodations. And so it can go over both. And it's created by a team. It's not created by just a teacher or the principal or the parent. It's created with a team. And it's not something that's set in stone, like we said with the 504, and it can be changed throughout the year if needed. Okay, so we're just going to go over this. This isn't the most exciting slide, and it kind of takes a while, so I'm sorry about that. I should have put a picture of chocolate or something. So we first start with the referral, and as a foster parent, you can make the referral. As a parent, the school can make a referral. So I had no idea what special education included. I just thought it was for really intellectually disabled kids. But my kid probably was failing through the MTSS supports, and the school came to me and said, "Hey, would you like us to do an evaluation?" Which I greatly appreciated. And they did that. Then also, I just want you to know that a caseworker can make a referral. And so any of those can make a referral. Then and once again, it's always best to refer in writing, sending an email to the principal, to the teacher, to maybe the counselor. If you know who the counselor is, you can send it to the counselor too. But sending an email and then in that email, explain your concerns, why you think an evaluation is needed, share what's been tried before that hasn't worked, or you can share important information like diagnosis. You're not required to share diagnosis, but that can be helpful. You can white out information you don't want them to see, but that can also be really helpful. And then in the lot, it says the school has a reasonable amount of time to respond. So what is a reasonable amount of time? I don't know. But I always tell parents, if you haven't heard back in a week or two, then reach back out. And let them know that you're willing to sign a consent form. How can you help the process get going? But just, make sure that they know that you're not dropping that. And they have to respond in writing. They have to respond, yes, they're going to evaluate, and here's the consent form for you to sign, or they have to respond no in writing and why they're not going to evaluate. Um, so, and for them to evaluate, they have to have a parent
Another
sign.
question, I'm sorry. When
Yeah.
you're saying they have to give you something in writing, is there a particular time they have to do it within a month's time, 2 weeks' time? I heard that some people have waited up to 6 months.
Yeah,
And I
and
don't know what
and
element.
I would think that that's not reasonable, right?
Oh, that's what I said. And I told them, I said, just keep calling every week and just refresh their memory.
Yeah, and this is where I hear a lot of complaints for that when people have asked in not in writing. you know, um, because then things do just get dropped. But if you have it in writing, you second email say, I requested 2 weeks ago on this date, hold them responsible. And so that it really helps it go along. I would say, I think what I've heard in some things like a month is reasonable. But I think that's pretty long. So you could reach out. I definitely think you should reach out before. Um, so yeah, that's just, I say 1 or 2 weeks, reach out again. Now, uh, then they need to give the parent a consent to evaluate. Now, here's where the tricky part is. For foster parents, you are not always the parent in special education. And this is kind of it, but you can be the parent. So a foster parent has to meet these qualifications. So it would be that the parent has no more rights. Their rights have been extinguished. And you can't have a conflict of interest. So if you work for the district or have a child in the same classroom, that might be a conflict of interest. And so that biological or adoptive parent really should be the one signing. Sometimes I know they're hard to get a hold of. And so a school is supposed to reach out and reach out and reach out in a number of different ways to get a hold of that parent. And we know that if we want reunification, that parent should totally be involved in this. And so we really want them to be involved. Now, as a foster parent, you are super key to also be involved. But signing that consent, it really should be the parent. And signing for to start special education, it should be the parent. And so there's a lot of questions. There might be like a restraining order or something. And so that kind of causes some issues. And that would be kind of the school should work with the caseworker and figure out the best path forward on that, if that's a possibility or not. So that's just a little caveat in there for foster parents. It makes it a little bit trickier. Then if they decide to do an evaluation and the consent form is signed, then the school has 45 school days to do the evaluation. So sometimes people have asked in the summer, and those aren't school days. The school could evaluate, but they're not obligated to. But here's another thing for you to know is if DCFS requests, then the school's actually required to do it in 30 days, not even school days. It's 30 days from the time they requested. But you're not DCFS. So if you request, it's still the 45 school days. But if DCFS requests, it's 30. Now, I know caseworkers are also overworked and underpaid, and they're busy. And so is it worth waiting for a caseworker to do it? That's kind of up to you and your caseworker and how you know things work. You could write the email and send it to the caseworker to send, do all the work. And so if you want that 30-day, but the 30 days is because we know these kids are jumping around a lot. And so we want to make sure and get that evaluate. We don't want to get half of an evaluation done and then they move placements. And so that's kind of where that comes in. Okay, so that was a lot. So then after they've done that evaluation, then they have an eligibility meeting and they determine if that student is eligible for special education. And we'll kind of go over how they meet the qualifications for eligible. But they go over and see if that child is qualifies. Now, if they don't qualify, maybe a 504 would be appropriate. So, and that's why on that 504 slide, ask for a special education evaluation, because then that covers kind of both. And they might not need the special education, they just might need the 504, but you can request that evaluation. Then after they've determined that they're eligible, then they get together with an IEP team. And that is when they create that individualized education plan for that student. And part of that IEP meeting is you're going to determine the placement of that student. Now, placement means lots of different things to lots of different people. And I kind of hate it because the special education definition is the most vague kind of, but it means just the continuum of services, or where they're going to receive, not where, but how they're going to receive their services. So if you're talking about like child welfare, it's where that student is placed, right? Their location, your address, or wherever they're placed. In with youth and care and education, like up at the state, that's like the location, like the school that they're getting their education in. But with special education, it's referring to how they're going to receive their services. So that it's kind of confusing. And a lot of caseworkers wouldn't know that either. So that might need to, just clarify that if that's being talked about in a kind of a special education realm, like what exactly they're meaning. And then every year there's an annual review, and that's to adjust their goals, because their goals are written for a year out. And so if they're not meeting their goals, or if they are, they should be renewed. They should review them and make new goals if as needed. And okay, so now let's talk about how to qualify for special education, or how a student qualifies. So there's 13 qualifying categories, and a student has to fit into one of these qualifying categories. Now, like you see here, like fetal alcohol syndrome is not one of the categories, but it can also fit into like other health impairment. ADHD can also fit into other health impairment. And a lot of students have a few of these. So you might have emotional behavioral issues and autism and ADHD. And so what of their disabilities impacts the student the most? And that's what they're going to qualify them under. So if autism is impacting their education the most, then they would put under autism. But because you're putting them under autism, that doesn't mean they can't get speech language help. So this is kind of a gateway to get into special education, but it doesn't impact what services they get. So it doesn't matter what their qualification is, they can get the same services. So I just want to clarify that, because sometimes that isn't done as well with students. Okay, but that's only one prong of qualifying for special education. So that's number one. Does the student have IDEA disability? That was one of those 13. But then number two, does that disability adversely affect their educational performance? And that doesn't mean just academics, it can be functional also. And then does that child require customized, special designed instruction, modified instruction? And if you answer yes to all three, then that student qualifies for special education. I have a neighbor who has a student has autism. So that's one of the IDEA disabilities. Does it adversely affect their educational performance? They're actually very bright and they do well in school, and they don't have really any behavior problems. They really do okay, and they don't really require any special education. So she was denied a special education. Now she was not happy with that because she felt like there were some things. And so this is kind of disputable. And this is where you would, in that eligibility meeting, decide, and discuss if they require these services. Now, I'm not going to go into this, but if a student does deny a student for special education, then there's something that you can request called an independent educational evaluation. And if you have questions about that, if that happens, you're welcome to reach out, but I don't think we have time to cover all that. But okay, so now the student has qualified for, they're eligible for special education and an IEP. And so now an IEP team is formed and you have an IEP meeting. And there are certain people that are required to be at that team meeting. Without those required people, there should not be a team meeting. So if you see this happening, this should not happen. So the parent is one person. Now back again, that is that biological parent, if possible. Or it could be the foster parent, you know, so that's just, each situation is different, right? Then student is written in there, and student, if they're over 18, then they don't need a parent there, and they can say, no, I don't want a parent there. My child can say, I don't need a parent there. They're 18, they can say that. But they can also give permission to have that parent there. It also is written there because when they're age 14, they're actually required to be invited to that IEP meeting because they're going to be working on transition goals to adult life. And so that student really needs to have a say in those. Now, the student is not required to attend, but they are required to be invited, and the school is required to get input for them. My son said, no way, I'm not going to that meeting. And if I wish I would have known better, I would have had more of a say of that, but I didn't. And so they took, you know, what he would like to have a career in and what kind of things he is interested in, and took that information also. Okay, so then we move to the special education teacher. The special education teacher is obviously the one that's going to be giving that modified instruction, so they need to be in attendance. Then there's a regular education teacher. Most kids in special education also attend regular education classes. And so we really want a regular education teacher to be there so that they know what's going on. They can have a say on if they can provide those things in the classroom or how this would look. So they're really important. They have a star because there's some kids that are going to have so many disabilities, they're not going to be in a regular ed classroom at all. But if there's a possibility, that regular ed teacher should be there so that they can, let's see how we can make this work. Because studies have shown that the more that the kids can be, students that can be educated with their general education peers, the better they're going to do. And so we want to try to get them as close as we can into a regular classroom. Then the LEA representative is local, stands for local education agency. That's either like the district or the school. So that would usually be like the vice principal or principal, because they're in charge of all the finances. And so we need someone that's has the money to be able to help make decisions too. And then the related service providers are like, if they're going to receive speech services, they should be there, or occupational therapy or psychological services, those people should be there. So those are the required members, but then you have a whole host of other people that could come. And as a parent, if you're acting as the parent, then you can actually invite lots of other people. It's best to let the school know if you'd be inviting them. That's just common courtesy. But the foster parent should obviously be there. They're a great resource. The caseworker should be there. You might have a doctor that could provide input. They're usually busy and they're not able to come, but if they could provide some information, they can be there. So maybe a transition to adult living coordinator could be there. Vocational rehabilitation, if they're providing services. So there's lots of other people that can be there. So you might have a team of 5 of 20, you know, that are part of the IEP team. It really can depend, but you especially need the 4. You know, you might have not, my son didn't have any related service providers, and so 4 were essential for that team member. Now, there's a lot of times where a regular education teacher says, I need to go back to my class. Well, you as a parent get to make that decision. If you do not want them to leave and you feel like they need to be there, they need to either be there, or you can postpone that IEP meeting to continue later. But you can also give that permission if you're like, yeah, I think they've given the information they need. You sign a paper and they can leave if that's something that you're okay with. But the parent kind of has a say over that, if they're okay if that person leaves. Okay, so like I said before, if one of these team members is missing, you should not be having the IEP meeting. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else that I was going to say about that. No, I don't think that's it. Okay, so with the IEP, then the IEP starts with a really long name and a really long acronym, because we like lots of acronyms in special education. So present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, PLAF. I call it present level. So it really is a description of this child. What is this child's strengths? What are the parents' concerns? What are the teachers' concerns? We've done these evaluations. What do the evaluations show? What do the diagnoses from outside doctors show? And what are their needs? What are their needs? What is this, the needs that this student has? And this is really the basis of the whole IEP. Because if a concern isn't addressed here, it's not addressed in the rest of the IEP. So it's really important. So after you've written out your present levels, then the goals should be written. And the goals are written by the IEP team to develop and address those needs that are written in the present levels. They should lead to services supporting, so they might need a speech language, or they might need a psychological services or whatever. And they might need transportation, because maybe the school that would best support your student is not at your neighborhood school. And so the school is responsible for providing that transportation. And then they should be appropriately ambitious. That actually is shown to like have the biggest effect, is that if parents and teachers can help write appropriate, ambitious goals and make those known to that student, then that actually has shown to help them the most. And so the goals should be SMART goals. So that, I don't know if you guys have heard that. They should be specific, they should be measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So all these goals are written for 1 year out. So that's a long time, but like I said, it says should be monitored for progress. So every time your student it's usually when they receive their report card, then you should receive a report on their IEP goals also. But if you as a parent would like something sooner, that can be discussed in that IEP meeting also. If you feel like this is too long, I don't know what's happening, I need to have more information, then you can change that. It's not set in stone. Okay, so here's just some of the related services we talked about. This isn't all inclusive, but here's some of the things that might be needed to be included in that student's IEP. Okay, and then the IEP should also include the date when it should begin, the frequency, location, and duration of services. So it should have actually like the number of minutes per month, I think, that student should receive speech services or occupational services, and who is going to be administering those. Then it has supplementary aids and services. So if there needs to be transportation and things like that, we talked about that. Then accommodations, we talked about that. So a lot of kids need extra accommodations so that they can survive and thrive in that regular education classroom, and also in their special education classroom, they might need accommodations. And then special factors. So special factors might be behavior. If behavior needs to be addressed, that should be marked. Assistive technology, that's, can be high tech to low tech. That should be noted on there. And then I don't remember the last one actually on there. Sorry, but those two should be on there. And then an explanation of when the parent will receive. And then if the student needs to receive extended school year, like, so if that student is regressing so much over the summer, then that needs to be discussed, and should we provide services over the summer for that student? And then if, like I said, if they're 14 or above, then they should have transition goals also written in there. So here's that placement that we talked about. And important part of special education is that least restrictive environment. And so that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different kids. And so, but we want to educate those kids in the least restrictive environment. So that might mean a regular classroom with modified instruction. It might mean a special class, which can sometimes be called a resource class. It might mean 3 resource classes, 3 classes that they get pulled out. Or it could be a whole day in that class. But it also can mean a special school. So you might know of like some special schools that can meet the needs better than your regular school can. And so they might need to attend a special school. And that it can also mean home instruction or like in an institution or a hospital. So there's just a lot of, and this is just 4, but it can be a combination of things too. So your student might be educated at home, but then they also go to the regular class during some of the day too. So it can be, and this is where the team can be creative and figure out what would be the best for that student. Okay, and then they have their annual review, and it happens every year annually. But that reevaluation, so when they actually do the evaluation, the tests, that happens every 3 years, unless a parent or a teacher requests it. So I remember talking, my son had, he was getting pulled out for math. But I said, you know, he is struggling in reading. And so they were willing to do an evaluation, you know, before that 3 years and see if he would qualify for special education with reading. So it really, but I'll also say there's certain tests and those tests can't be administered more than once in a year. So let's say you have the Woodcock-Johnson test. That can't be done again in that same year. It has to wait for a year. A different test can be done, but the same test can't be done within a year. Okay, so here's another chocolate question. Can anyone give me a basic description of special education or IEP? Take yourself off mute and just, it's kind of hard because we talked about 30 minutes about it. So, but is there anything that you can tell me a basic description of it? Okay, well, it's,
I can guess.
yeah, go
Yes.
ahead.
So it's like an IEP is a plan to acknowledge what the modifications are that you need and how and what the goals are to have the kid hopefully hit within the year and how you're going to try to get with those modifications to hit the goals, maybe? I don't know.
Yes, I think that's great. Go buy yourself a piece of chocolate. I wish I could give you one. But yeah, I love that. I think that's great. So they have to qualify in one of those categories and they're providing modifications to their education and yeah. Then what about a 504? Can someone give me just a brief description of what a 504?
A 504 is just basically a plan that says my child needs these accommodations to be able to perform on the same level as their peers.
Yes, that's right. So to fully participate, they need these things, and it's a civil rights law, you know, act. That's kind of important to remember. It kind of, you know, just so they don't get discriminated against. And then the 504 does the accommodations, and the IEP is the accommodations and the modifications. And then how often is it revisited? I think we talked about that, right? Every year. So both the 504 and the IEP should be revisited every year. I'll tell you something also funny about the 504, which hopefully this doesn't happen, but a parent is actually not even required to attend the meeting. So hopefully they're not doing it without you, because that best practice would be to invite the parent. But you know, if you have a child with a 504, you're requesting a 504, you know, you could always just make sure and request that you're invited to the meeting. Okay, so here's let's see, I actually don't have something to put in the chat for this. But for you that have a child with an IEP, you might have been given, well, you hopefully it's required to be given your procedural safeguards. And procedural safeguards is a 23-page document printed on newsprint. It's the most ugly document you've ever had. I would always keep it on my counter and say, okay, I'm going to read it this time. And you know what? My son graduated and I never read it. But there's a broken down version that a lot of schools or districts will use. But basically, it says that you have access to their records. You have a right to their records. And to be able to, for the school to evaluate and to provide special education, you get to consent to those. They cannot do them without you consenting. It also talks about confidentiality and that they are not allowed to give that information out to people that don't have interest in your student. And then disciplinary procedures, it talks about those. And with special education, we're not going to really talk about those, but what a student with special education actually have some rights when they're disciplined. And then it also talks about dispute resolution. And so that's, if you're not agreeing with things, there are dispute resolution things that you can do, all the way up to due process. There's mediation, there's state complaints, things like that. And that's written out in that procedural safeguards book. But also our name is written in there. And so, because like I said, we're designated for the state of Utah to be a parent help. And so you're welcome to give us a call and we can help you walk through that also. And we always recommend going with the lowest level. So working with the school, then working with the district, then moving up from there. And so, but we can help you work with the school or work with the district if you don't think things are going well. Okay, so this last slide I made just before I got on. And so all I had was post survey written on there. So I put some chocolate so you can at least look at that. But this is a post survey and I would love you to fill it out. It's anonymous, so I don't know who's filling out, but it just kind of, you critique if this information was useful, because I would like to know if it's not useful and what I can change and things like that. So please fill that out and I will wait while you guys do that. I think, and I apologize if some of the questions are the same. I'll just be quiet for a minute. Okay, I don't know if I missed any questions in the chat, but do you guys have any questions? Kind of a lot of new information, or maybe not. Questions about how, how to contact us, or, what kind of things to contact us about, or.
I have a question, Melissa.
Mhm.
What is the most appropriate way to go about handling it when the 504 is not being followed?
So yeah, so what we talked about, like what Julie had talked about, she wrote out what those things were, and kind of, if that teacher is kind of refusing, just making it known that this is a legal legal obligation, that they're to follow it. And then if that's not going anywhere, then then I think appropriately to go to the district
Okay.
and talk to them and see what kind of, maybe this teacher needs some more training, they might just think that you're being a spoiled parent, but just
Mhm.
helping, how can that, how can the district help this
Mhm.
teacher? And I'll just say, really, there can be lots of emotions with these meetings, with 504 and IEP meetings and with schools. And you can get fiery, right? Like there's just a lot of emotions that run high. Um, on both ends, on the school and on your end. They might feel like they're being criticized or looked down upon or whatever. Really, it's so helpful if you go in with a collaborative mindset, making sure that they know you want to work with them, um, making sure telling them what they're doing good, but how can we work on this? Really not emotional. But if you are going to be emotional, say, I'm sorry, I'm emotional. This is just means a lot to me. Just really
Mhm.
having some good communication skills, and just, yeah, really trying to not have anger. I think it's okay to be assertive but not aggressive. No one wants to help an aggressive person, but an assertive, saying what you feel like is needed.
Yeah. Collaborative over combative, huh?
Yes, yeah. And
Yeah.
that goes a long way. People really, you might have a teacher that's flustered and frustrated also, and you go in and combative and they're really put up arms. But if you go in saying, how can we work together? You've been a great teacher in these ways, it could go a long way. They really are much more willing to work with you.
Mhm. That makes great sense. Now I'm going to ask a daring question, which is sometimes we find that some schools have better behaviorists on board or better programming or opportunities for kids. When you ask the question, have you had a good or bad experience? I could have gone either way. And the bad's so bad that you're crying as a parent. You're like, this child couldn't be more unhappy and seem villainous if they tried. The amount of
Yeah.
time you can put a 5-year-old in the principal's office is a little bit startling to me. But on the other hand, a great one changes everything. So is it bold to say, do you have suggestions when people are like, I don't know what to do. I feel like I need to be the parent looking for a specific school.
Yeah, well, and that's unfortunately, that's how it is, right? You have good and bad teachers, and some are just born to be awesome teachers, and some really struggle and need a lot of support. And so, as a parent, I mean, you guys are working with kids that are so hard sometimes and so traumatized in so many ways, and so helping those teachers understand that, I think, is key. Like, how can we reinforce these positive behaviors instead of, you know, disciplining these bad behaviors? And it's really hard. I don't know. I mean, you can look at other schools, but they're not really a school. You have to like apply for a variance, right, to go to another
Mhm.
school. And so they may not allow that, and that might not work out for you. And so really trying to work with those teachers, helping, how giving them information. They might need information. There's a behaviorist, just so you know, at the State Board of Education that sometimes a teacher might not know about. And so helping them know that that's a free resource for them. Also, I don't know, are you guys familiar with Raise the Future?
Mhm.
They are an organization that does TBRI. You might have heard of that, trust-based relational intervention. And they work with students in homes, like helping, with trauma. Like a lot of it is trauma, adoption, foster care. But they also have a woman that is a teacher. She's a special education teacher, and she's adopted 2 kids with fetal alcohol syndrome. And she can go in and help schools be more trauma informed, which I know schools are getting training on that, but she can actually work specifically with them. The school has to, I think, pay some amount, but it's not outrageous. So that could, but it has to be the school that agrees to that. But if a school's really struggling, because the school doesn't want this bad behaving child either, it's disrupting everything. And so if you can give them resources, and I can give that out to Teresa, after or something, then they might be willing to work. I gave that resource to a school down in Kanab, and they ate it right up. But they are also rural and they don't have resources down there, and so they're looking for anything. So when they know that, oh, this is something that they can take advantage of, a big district like Alpine might be like, no, So
Well, a good number of the people who are on here have probably gone through TBRI training. We try to make that a pretty top format of this, you need this.
yeah. So this TBRI, and talking to that parent, it was like it made a world of difference with this kid. They couldn't have this kid in school, and now all of a sudden they're more trauma informed in a school that this kid's going to school. So I
I'm gonna
think,
leave room for other people to do questions, so I'm gonna back out for a minute in case.
yeah. Any other questions or suggestions?
I kind of have a question, but I'm not sure how to like phrase it yet. So I may just ramble for a minute. So like, I adopted my kids last fall, but during the adoption process, we got my son tested and he was diagnosed with autism. He was 3, so he was just phasing out of Kids Who Count because I'm in Nebo, and they put him in a trial-based early intervention preschool. And then after a month, they were like, oh, he's too smart. He doesn't fit here. You're going to have to just do your own thing. So I think that was like the whole, he was diagnosed with autism, but I think they didn't feel like the behaviors fit or whatnot. And I guess like I did put him in a different preschool. And then the other preschool contacted me just 2 weeks ago and said, are you going to have him come here? Or really, you should have him get retested. So I've got him scheduled to be retested, but I don't know what he needs to know or what, I guess, how do you figure out what it is that you're worried about? Because like, I don't know what, what, like what the school should be able to do for autism versus what is just he's high functioning, and like I don't know what to advocate for. I guess I guess that's what it's coming down to, because like the school tells me he's fine, but the other preschool that he went to was like, oh my gosh, we had to have a whole nother person who just sat with him the whole time all by himself because he couldn't interact with anybody else. And so as I'm going into in a couple weeks with this new testing, because it's been a year so we can retest him, like they said afterwards they'll have this little meeting to decide if he's eligible and the IEP and all of that. But like, I don't even know what to say anymore, because I just know that last time they're like, oh, he's too smart and he has to like, I guess they said they had to hit below like 7 or 10% on these at least 3 of the tests. And they're like, he hit below 10 or 7 or whatever it was on 2 of the tests, and the other one he was 1 point over. So oh well, he doesn't fit. Like, how do you advocate when I don't even know what, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that is so hard. Kind of like my neighbor I was talking about, right? So, they have a qualifying disability. Do they fit the criteria? Do they need that modified instruction? But a lot of times they're focusing on academics. And it sounds like he's smart and he's doing okay academically. But can he do okay sitting for a whole day in kindergarten? Like functionally and socially, he might need modified instruction. And so bringing that up, like, and I don't know if they're testing for some sensory discrepancies, so if they haven't done that, have them maybe do a sensory profile. But just yeah, it's tricky, but saying he's not we're not seeing him being able to um function at school and receive that education, you know. He's smart enough for it, but can he sit there and get that? He might not be. You know, and express and I think having a list from that other school, that other preschool, which has probably been beneficial for you to see how that is different, and just maybe have a list of the things that he had problems with, because they can take all that into account into that evaluation, and things that you've seen at home.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question for Miss Bagshaw. Is there a chance that they'll tell you what they're testing? Like, I might have missed you say that, but like if they're saying, oh, we're testing, can he put a puzzle together in 5 minutes or stuff like that? That might help you to know what they're looking at specifically. So you could say, all right, well, clearly we're fine on those markers. Let's focus on these. I mean, I have no idea what you've been through, so I don't know if that's a good suggestion or not.
Yeah, we did, they did tell me what it was that, like, they have a printout of the scores, which I would have to dig up because it was been a year ago. So I do know what they tested on, but one of the kind of offhand comments, not officially in the IEP meeting, was because I had him in occupational therapy because of his sensory stuff and his behavioral issues. And we also have him in ABA therapy. And there was kind of almost this, oh, well, you got him too much help too early so that now he's progressed. And so, oh, well. And I'm just like, so I did my job, because I mean, all of that was while he was my foster kid. And because it was the end of September when all this came down and I adopted him. And it was like, I did my job. And so I helped him too much in order to get this stuff from school. That's awesome. You know, like but I do have the list of what it is. And it was mostly the behavior and the aggression. And I can't remember the third one. I'd have to go look it up, but.
Hi, my name is Ron. My biological daughter has autism, and we put her through the same ABA therapy and stuff. And what we found helped for us a lot was getting her BCBA to advocate. So if you can get your BCBA to come with the testing and help say, hey, they may have already done. He may have passed this test, but these are our results. These are his ongoing treatment notes, and he does need this extra assistance, and here's the documentation to show it. So try and get some help from your BCBA.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ron.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm just going to say this. I feel like it's going to sound offensive to you because you're not in this situation, it sounds like. But, some parents are super unhappy that their child is being taken off of IEP or something. But really, that's the goal, right? You want them to be able to graduate into like regular education and be able to function in that way. That's something to celebrate. But I understand when it's not appropriate, then you're saying no, they're not going to survive in this situation. But just so you know, that can be something to celebrate later on if you feel like they're doing so well.
Yeah, I just want him to be able to like sit through a class and not like hit his neighbor because his neighbor is in his space, like that would be nice. But maybe that's too much for me to ask. I don't know.
I think the teacher would like that too, actually. So yeah, I think just documenting all those kind of things, it is important. The school can see that without some modified instruction on how to behave differently, it's not gonna go well.
Anyone else? If not, Melissa, thank you so much for your wisdom and being willing to share with us tonight. My guess, because you hit record, it might show up on your computer. So
Oh yeah, okay, I'll push pause.